In a world where the boundaries between realms blurred like mist on a frosty morning, there existed a glacier unlike any other. This was no ordinary frozen expanse. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, its crystalline structures refracting light into colors that seemed to dance just beyond human comprehension. At its heart lay the Palace of Eternal Frost, a structure so breathtaking it defied logic. Towering spires of ice rose like frozen flames, their surfaces smooth as glass yet impossibly strong. The palace glimmered under the pale light of twin moons, casting ethereal shadows across the snow-covered plains. Within this enchanted fortress lived Princess Lyria, the last heir of the glacial dynasty. Her beauty was legendary, whispered about in hushed tones by those who dared speak of her existence. She possessed skin as translucent as freshly fallen snow, eyes that shimmered like liquid silver, and hair that cascaded down her back in waves of shimmering frost. Yet it wasn't merely her appearance that captivated all who beheld her. It was the aura of mystery and power that surrounded her, as if she carried within her the secrets of the universe itself. The people of the neighboring lands spoke of her in reverent tones, though few had ever seen her face. Some claimed she could summon storms with a mere thought, while others believed she communed with ancient spirits trapped within the glacier's depths. Legends told of how she ruled not through force but through an innate connection to the very fabric of her realm, bending time and space to her will. Despite these tales, or perhaps because of them, no one dared approach her domain without invitation, a decree enforced by invisible forces that repelled even the most determined explorers. It was said that Princess Lyria rarely ventured beyond her palace walls, preferring instead to wander the labyrinthine halls filled with memories of her ancestors. These corridors were lined with ancient artifacts from civilizations long forgotten, each piece telling a story of times when her people walked among the stars. Yet for all her isolation, she remained deeply connected to the world beyond her icy sanctuary, watching over humanity with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The humans of the lower valleys lived simple lives, unaware of the celestial being who observed them from afar. They toiled in their fields, built their modest homes, and raised their families under skies that shifted with the seasons. Among them lived Kale, a young man whose life had been anything but ordinary. Born during a rare celestial alignment, he had always felt different from his peers. His eyes, an unusual shade of violet, seemed to see things others couldn't, patterns in the stars, whispers in the wind, and sometimes, fleeting visions of a woman made entirely of light. Kale's childhood had been marked by strange occurrences. When he touched certain objects, they would glow with an inner warmth. Plants flourished in his presence, and animals sought him out as if drawn by some unseen force. The villagers regarded him with a mixture of awe and suspicion, whispering about the star-born child behind closed doors. His parents, simple farmers, tried to protect him from the curious stares and occasional hostility, but nothing could shield him from the growing sense that he didn't truly belong. As Kale grew older, these feelings intensified. He found himself drawn to the mountains, spending hours gazing at the distant glacier that dominated the horizon. Something about its crystalline surface called to him, though he couldn't explain why. At night, he would dream of walking through halls of ice, hearing music that resonated deep within his soul. These dreams left him both exhilarated and unsettled, filling him with questions he couldn't answer and desires he didn't understand. His life took a dramatic turn on the eve of his 21st birthday. As he stood in his family's field, watching the sunset paint the glacier in hues of gold and crimson, the air around him suddenly grew cold. A soft, melodic voice echoed in his mind, speaking words he couldn't comprehend yet somehow understood completely. The ground beneath his feet trembled gently, and when he looked up, he saw lights dancing across the glacier's surface, lights that formed patterns disturbingly similar to those he'd seen in his dreams. The call came again, stronger this time, pulling at something deep within his chest. It wasn't a sound exactly, but rather a feeling that vibrated through every fiber of his being. Kale knew, with absolute certainty, that he was being summoned. Against every rational thought, despite the fear coiling in his stomach, he began walking toward the glacier. Each step felt both terrifying and inevitable, as if he were finally answering a question he'd been asking his entire life without knowing it. The journey to the glacier proved more arduous than Kale had anticipated. The path wound through treacherous mountain passes where biting winds threatened to push him back with every step forward. Yet something kept him moving, an invisible thread pulling him inexorably toward his destination. As he climbed higher, the air grew thinner and colder, but strangely, Kale found himself unaffected by the harsh conditions. Where others might have succumbed to frostbite or altitude sickness, he pressed on, his body responding to some ancient rhythm that seemed to harmonize with the very heartbeat of the glacier itself. When he finally reached the base of the great ice wall, he encountered what should have been an insurmountable barrier. The glacier stretched upward like a frozen waterfall, its surface too smooth for climbing and too sheer for scaling. But before doubt could take root in his mind, the ice began to shift and change. Crystalline steps emerged from the solid wall, forming a staircase that spiraled upward into the clouds. Each step glowed faintly as he ascended, illuminating his path with a soft, welcoming light that seemed almost alive. At the summit, he found himself standing before massive gates of pure ice, intricately carved with patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid when viewed from different angles. Before he could wonder how to proceed, the gates parted silently, revealing a courtyard that defied all natural laws. The air inside was warmer than expected, carrying with it the scent of blooming flowers that shouldn't exist in such a frozen realm. Strange plants with crystalline petals swayed gently in a breeze that came from nowhere, their colors shifting like rainbows caught in falling water. As Kale stepped forward, the ground beneath his feet transformed from solid ice to something resembling polished crystal. With each step, images flickered across its surface, visions of ancient ceremonies, celestial dances, and beings of light interacting with early humans. The deeper he ventured into the palace grounds, the more pronounced these visions became, until he could almost feel the presence of those long-gone moments brushing against his consciousness. He passed through archways that seemed to stretch infinitely in both directions, their frames adorned with symbols that resonated with something deep within his memory, though he was certain he'd never seen them before. The true magnificence of the palace revealed itself gradually, like layers of a dream unfolding. Hallways of living ice twisted and turned in impossible configurations, their walls displaying scenes that changed with each passing moment. In one corridor, he watched as constellations formed and dissolved before his eyes, telling stories of creation and destruction on a cosmic scale. In another, he witnessed the evolution of his own species, from primitive beginnings to the complex civilization he knew today. Every room he entered seemed to pulse with its own unique energy, each space attuned to different aspects of existence, from the fundamental forces that governed reality to the delicate balance of emotions that defined sentient life. Yet amidst all this splendor, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that he was being guided, watched by unseen eyes that followed his every move. Occasionally, he would catch glimpses of movement in the periphery of his vision, shadows that danced just beyond sight, forms that melted away when he turned to look directly at them. The air hummed with a constant, barely perceptible vibration, as if the entire palace were a living organism maintaining perfect harmony between countless interconnected systems. Despite the overwhelming grandeur surrounding him, Kale's attention remained focused on the central chamber he instinctively knew awaited at the heart of this crystalline maze. The pull that had brought him here grew stronger with each step, drawing him inexorably forward. The closer he came to his destination, the more the palace seemed to respond to his presence, its crystalline structures glowing brighter, its ambient music swelling into a symphony that resonated through his very bones. Finally, after what felt like both moments and eternities, Kale found himself standing before the entrance to the central hall. Unlike the other rooms he had passed through, this doorway radiated a palpable energy that made his skin tingle and his breath catch in his throat. The frame pulsed with a light that seemed to contain all colors and none simultaneously, creating an effect that was both beautiful and slightly disorienting. He hesitated only briefly before stepping through, knowing that whatever awaited him beyond would change everything he thought he understood about himself and the universe. The moment Kale crossed the threshold, time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. The vast chamber unfolded before him like a flower blooming in reverse, its dimensions defying conventional understanding. At its center, upon a dais of floating crystal, stood Princess Lyria. She wasn't merely beautiful, she was transcendent, her form seeming to exist in multiple states of being at once. Her presence filled the space with an energy that made Kale's very cells vibrate in harmony, yet also sent shivers racing along his spine. Their eyes met across the distance, and Kale felt as if he were falling into twin galaxies of liquid silver. The princess descended from her crystalline platform with movements that seemed to bend the rules of physics, each step creating ripples in the air like stones skipped across still water. When she finally stood before him, close enough to touch yet maintaining an invisible boundary, Kale found himself unable to speak. Her gaze pierced through him, reading layers of his soul he hadn't known existed. "You've come," she said, her voice weaving through his mind like a melody composed of starlight and frost. "Though I've watched you since your first breath, I feared you might not answer my call." Her words carried the weight of centuries, each syllable resonating with meanings far beyond their surface. Kale struggled to process what she was saying, his mind reeling from the implications of her statement. He began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the torrent of emotions flooding through him. Recognition warred with confusion, familiarity battled disbelief. The dreams, the visions, the inexplicable pull he'd felt his entire life, all of it suddenly made sense, yet created 1,000 new questions. Princess Lyria extended a hand, palm up, and though she didn't touch him, Kale felt warmth spreading through his chest, melting away years of uncertainty and isolation. "You carry within you a spark of the original fire," she continued, her voice softening to a whisper that nevertheless filled the entire chamber. "A fragment of the primordial essence that shaped both our peoples. That is why you hear my call where others cannot. Why you see patterns in the stars that have long faded from human memory." She paused, tilting her head as if listening to some distant sound only she could perceive. "But there is more. So much more." Kale's knees threatened to buckle as memories, not his own, flooded his consciousness. Visions of ancient beings crafting worlds from raw energy, of bridges spanning between dimensions, of promises made under dying suns. Through it all, he saw himself, or rather, versions of himself, playing crucial roles in events that spanned eons. The realization hit him with physical force. He wasn't just human. Or rather, he was human plus something else, something vast and ancient and incomprehensibly powerful. Princess Lyria's expression softened, becoming almost tender. "You've lived many lifetimes, Kale. Walked among stars and danced with comets. But each time, something pulls you back to this form, this particular point in space and time. Do you feel it? The threads connecting you to this moment." She gestured around them, and suddenly Kale could see them, the invisible strands of destiny binding him to this place, to her, to something greater than either of them could fully comprehend. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes as he nodded, unable to form words. The princess reached out again, this time allowing her fingers to brush lightly against his cheek. The contact sent shockwaves through his being, unlocking memories and abilities that had lain dormant within him. He saw flashes of their shared past, not just in this lifetime, but in countless others. Battles fought side by side. Worlds saved. Civilizations nurtured and protected. But why now? Kale managed to choke out, his voice trembling. "Why bring me here after all this time?" The princess's expression grew grave, her silver eyes clouding with emotions too complex for human interpretation. "Because the balance is shifting," she said, her voice carrying the weight of impending doom. "The ancient forces that maintained harmony between our realms are weakening. The bridge between worlds grows thin, and darkness gathers beyond it." She stepped back, allowing Kale to see the truth written in the air itself. Dark tendrils creeping at the edges of reality, threatening to consume everything. "And you're the key," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "Not just to preserving what exists, but to forging something new. Something necessary for the survival of both our peoples." The chamber seemed to darken around them, the crystalline walls reflecting the gathering storm beyond. "But be warned, Kale. What lies ahead will test everything you believe about yourself, about us, about the nature of existence itself. And there are those who would see our union fail, who would rather watch both our worlds burn than accept the changes that must come." Before Kale could respond, the princess turned away, her form momentarily blurring as if she were struggling to maintain her physical presence. When she faced him again, her expression had hardened into something resolute and ancient. "You need time to process," she said, her voice regaining its former strength. "To remember who you truly are. But know this, every moment we delay brings us closer to catastrophe. The choice is yours, as it has always been. But choose wisely, for the fate of countless realities hangs in the balance." With that, she gestured, and the chamber began to transform around them. The crystalline walls softened, becoming more organic, more welcoming. Furniture appeared, chairs of ice that felt warm to the touch, tables that seemed to grow from the floor itself. Food materialized, Dishes Kale recognized alongside others that made his mouth water with anticipation of flavors he couldn't name. Yet despite the sudden domesticity of the setting, the tension in the air remained palpable. "Eat," the princess commanded gently. "Rest. Remember. Tomorrow, we begin the work that will determine the fate of everything." She moved to a nearby window, gazing out at the gathering storm beyond the palace walls. "And Kale," she added without turning, "know that whatever happens, you were never meant to face this alone." As Kale settled into the surreal comfort of the transformed chamber, attempting to process the overwhelming revelations, Princess Lyria withdrew to her private quarters, a sanctum buried deep within the glacier's heart. Here, amidst walls that pulsed with ancient knowledge, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. The weight of countless lifetimes pressed upon her shoulders, each memory of their shared past bringing both comfort and anguish. She traced her fingers along the crystalline surface of her reflection pool, watching as images of their previous incarnations danced across its surface. In one lifetime, they had been warrior king and queen, uniting warring factions under a banner of peace. In another, scientist and philosopher, unraveling the mysteries of quantum consciousness. Most recently, they had been starfaring explorers, charting unknown regions of spacetime before their vessel had been lost to a temporal anomaly. Each incarnation had brought them closer to understanding their true purpose, yet each had ended in separation, their memories scattered across dimensions like stardust. The princess's thoughts turned to the current threat, the dark force gathering beyond the veil. She had felt its presence growing stronger with each passing cycle, its hunger for destruction evolving into something more calculated, more intelligent. This wasn't merely chaos seeking to consume order. This was a conscious entity, aware of their plans and determined to prevent them. Its tendrils had already begun infiltrating the weaker minds among her people, sowing doubt and fear about the necessity of bridging their world with humanity's. Her greatest concern, however, lay in the prophecy that had guided her actions for millennia. The ancient texts spoke of a choice that would split reality itself. One path leading to unprecedented unity and evolution, the other to catastrophic division. According to the scrolls, this decision would hinge on Kale's willingness to embrace his full heritage, to become something neither wholly human nor entirely alien. Yet the texts also warned of a traitor within their midst, someone who would seek to manipulate Kale's awakening for their own purposes. As she contemplated these dangers, Princess Lyria found herself drawn to the observation chamber, a room that allowed her to view the human world below. Through its crystalline windows, she watched Kale's village, noting how the people went about their daily lives unaware of the cosmic drama unfolding above them. Her heart ached with the knowledge that soon, their peaceful existence would be disrupted, regardless of which path they chose. The integration of their two species would require sacrifices, adjustments, and potentially painful revelations about the true nature of human history. Her thoughts were interrupted by a subtle shift in the air, the presence of another. Turning, she found her closest advisor, Elder Miris, materializing from the shadows. The ancient being's form shimmered between solid and ethereal, a testament to centuries spent studying the boundaries between dimensions. "Your Highness," Miris began, their voice carrying the weight of unspoken concerns. The council grows restless. They question the wisdom of bringing him here, of risking exposure for the sake of... "For the sake of everything," Lyria finished sharply, though without anger. "They forget that our isolation has led us to this precipice. Without the human element, without Kale's unique perspective, we cannot hope to counter the darkness gathering beyond the veil." She turned back to the window, her reflection joining the panorama of the human world below. "Besides, the bond between us runs deeper than they understand. Deeper than even Kale comprehends yet." Elder Miris approached cautiously, their forms solidifying further as they drew near. "And what of the risks? If the humans learn too much too quickly, if they reject what we offer?" The elder's voice trailed off, leaving the unsaid consequences hanging heavy in the air. "They won't," Lyria stated with quiet conviction. "Not if we handle this correctly. Not if we give them time to adjust, to understand the truth of their origins." She turned to face her advisor fully, her silver eyes blazing with determination. "Our people have grown complacent in their isolation, content to let the human world evolve separately. But the time for separation has passed. The threads of destiny are converging, and we must either weave them together or watch as they unravel completely." Miris studied her carefully, their ancient eyes seeing beyond the princess's composed exterior to the turmoil beneath. "You care for him," they observed softly. "More than protocol or duty would dictate." Lyria's response was immediate, yet layered with complexity. "I love him," she admitted, her voice steady despite the admission's weight. "In every lifetime, in every form, I have loved him. And he has loved me, though neither of us remembers clearly between incarnations. This connection isn't just biological or mystical, it's fundamental to the fabric of reality itself." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "But my personal feelings are secondary to the greater purpose. Even if they weren't, even if I had to sacrifice everything, including him, to ensure our people's survival, I would do so without hesitation." The elder bowed deeply, acknowledging the truth in her words. "Then we must prepare for what comes next. The darkness grows bolder, and time is no longer our ally." They straightened, their form becoming more substantial as they prepared to depart. "Shall I gather the council?" "Not yet," Lyria replied, her gaze returning to the human world below. "Let them rest tonight. Let Kale begin to remember who he truly is. Tomorrow, we'll reveal the full scope of what faces us, and what must be done to prevent catastrophe." As Miris faded from view, she added softly, almost to herself, "And may the stars guide us all." Back in the guest chamber, Kale found sleep elusive despite the day's exhausting revelations. The bed, crafted from what appeared to be living ice yet felt like the softest down, cradled him in comforting warmth. Yet his mind raced with questions, memories, and possibilities. Images from his past lives continued to surface, some clear, others fragmented, but all pointing to a destiny far greater than he'd ever imagined. He rose from the bed and wandered to the window, where the twin moons cast their silvery light across the glacier's surface. Below, he could see movement, shadowy figures patrolling the palace grounds, their forms occasionally catching the moonlight in ways that suggested they weren't entirely corporeal. Were these guards? Protectors? Or something else entirely? The thought sent a shiver down his spine, reminding him that despite the princess's revelations, he still understood so little about this world he'd been called to. As he watched, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, elegant being with features that seemed to shift between human and something else entirely. Their eyes caught the moonlight, revealing irises that glowed with an inner fire. The figure paused, meeting Kale's gaze through the window, and he felt a surge of recognition accompanied by a warning bell deep within his consciousness. There was something about this being, something familiar yet unsettling, that made his skin crawl. Turning away from the window, Kale paced the room, trying to make sense of the conflicting emotions swirling within him. On one hand, he felt an undeniable connection to Princess Lyria, a bond that transcended this lifetime and spoke to something fundamental in his being. On the other hand, doubts crept in, questions about whether he was truly ready for the responsibilities being thrust upon him, whether he could trust the visions and memories flooding his mind. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime, followed by the appearance of a small crystalline orb hovering in the air before him. It pulsed with a gentle light, projecting images into the room, scenes of the coming days, weeks, months. He saw himself learning to harness abilities that felt both foreign and instinctive, saw moments of triumph and heartbreak, saw glimpses of battles yet to be fought and alliances yet to be forged. But threaded through these visions was a darker presence, a shadow that seemed to grow stronger with each passing image. The orb dissolved into mist, leaving Kale more troubled than before. He realized that while Princess Lyria had shared much, she had also held back, perhaps necessarily so. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, both external and internal. He would have to confront not just the darkness gathering beyond the veil, but also his own fears, doubts, and limitations. More importantly, he would have to decide how much of himself to sacrifice for the greater good, and whether he could trust those around him, including the woman who had called him to this destiny. As dawn approached, painting the glacier in shades of rose and gold, Kale came to a realization that both terrified and excited him. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't face it alone. The princess had promised as much, and despite his reservations, he believed her. But belief alone wouldn't be enough to navigate the trials ahead. He needed to remember more, about himself, about their shared past, about the true nature of the threat they faced. And he needed to do so quickly, for the darkness beyond the veil was growing stronger with each passing moment. The first rays of sunlight filtering through the crystalline windows found Kale already awake and dressed, his mind buzzing with questions and half-formed theories. He had spent the remaining hours of darkness cataloging every detail of his surroundings, searching for clues in the intricate carvings and shifting patterns of the walls. Each symbol seemed to pulse with meaning, yet remained just beyond his complete understanding. The palace itself appeared to be waiting, holding its breath as if anticipating the day's events. Princess Lyria found him in the Grand Library, a cavernous chamber where books of living ice floated in organized chaos throughout the space. Their pages turned automatically, displaying knowledge from countless civilizations and timelines. She watched him for a moment, noting how naturally he interacted with the environment, how his hands hovered near the floating tomes without touching, as if sensing their contents intuitively. This small gesture confirmed what she had suspected. His memories were returning faster than anticipated. "Good morning," she said softly, causing several nearby books to flutter their pages in greeting. Kale turned, his violet eyes meeting hers with a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," he replied, gesturing to the surrounding books. "Though I suspect these have been keeping better watch over me than Morpheus." His attempt at humor masked the tension in his stance, the way his fingers twitched as if yearning to grasp something tangible. Lyria approached, her movements creating ripples in the air that caused nearby books to rearrange themselves. "Today we begin your training," she announced, her voice carrying both authority and compassion. "But first, breakfast. Then we'll visit the Hall of Echoes. It will help you access more of your memories." She extended her hand, palm up, mirroring the gesture from their initial meeting. This time, Kale didn't hesitate to place his hand in hers. The dining hall had transformed overnight, its crystalline furniture now bearing traces of organic elements, branches of ice that sprouted leaves of frost, chairs that seemed to grow roots into the floor. The food appeared more varied, incorporating elements from both their worlds. As they ate, Lyria explained the day's schedule, her words careful and measured. "The Hall of Echoes will show you more of our shared past, but be prepared, it can be overwhelming. The memories aren't linear, they'll come in fragments, impressions, emotions." Kale nodded, pushing aside a plate of unfamiliar delicacies. "I've already started remembering bits and pieces. Last night, I saw..." He hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about the shadowy figure he'd observed. Instead, he focused on the visions projected by the crystalline orb. "There's something, or someone, working against us. I felt it in the visions." Lyria's expression darkened, confirming his suspicions. "Yes. There are those who oppose our union, who fear the changes it represents. But we'll deal with them in time. For now, focus on remembering. Understanding our past is key to navigating our future." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "And Kale, trust your instincts. They've served you well across lifetimes." After breakfast, they made their way to the Hall of Echoes, a chamber that seemed to exist outside conventional space. The walls rippled like liquid mercury, reflecting infinite versions of themselves. As they entered, Kale felt the air thicken, charged with potential energy. Lyria guided him to the center of the room, where a pedestal of living crystal awaited. "Place your hands here," she instructed. "Let the memories come to you. Don't fight them, don't try to make sense of them immediately. Just experience." The moment his palms touched the crystal, visions exploded in his mind. He saw civilizations rising and falling, technologies that defied understanding, relationships that transcended mortal bonds. Through it all, he and Lyria remained constants, sometimes lovers, sometimes comrades, sometimes adversaries united by circumstance. Each memory brought new understanding, but also new questions. Why had they been separated in so many lifetimes? What force kept drawing them together? Hours passed unnoticed as Kale absorbed the flood of information. When he finally emerged from the trance-like state, he found Lyria watching him with an expression that combined pride and sorrow. "You're remembering faster than anyone could have predicted," she said, helping him steady himself. "But we must be careful. Too much too soon could overwhelm you." "I need to know everything," Kale insisted, his voice stronger than before. "If we're to face whatever's coming, I need to understand our full history. He paused, recalling a particularly vivid memory. Last night, I saw someone. I think they're important, maybe dangerous. Someone who doesn't want us to succeed. Lyria's grip on his arm tightened fractionally. Describe them, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Tall, elegant. Their features kept changing, but their eyes, they burned with something ancient and hungry. He met her gaze. Do you know who they are? She hesitated before nodding. Yes and no. They are complicated. We'll discuss them later. For now, focus on processing what you've learned. She guided him toward a nearby bench, where refreshments waited. Drink this, it will help stabilize your mind. The liquid in the crystal goblet shimmered with colors that seemed to dance in time with his thoughts. As Kale sipped the drink, he noticed subtle changes in the Hall of Echoes. The rippling walls now displayed specific scenes from their shared past. Moments of triumph, of loss, of discovery. One image caught his attention, a massive structure that seemed to bridge two worlds, its architecture combining elements from both their peoples. What is that? He asked, pointing. Lyria's expression grew thoughtful. That is our ultimate goal, the bridge of unity. In each lifetime, we've worked toward its completion, only to fall short. This time, we must succeed. But building it requires more than just physical construction. It demands a merging of consciousness, of culture, of spirit. She touched his hand. Which is why your role is so crucial. You embody both worlds, Kale. You are the living proof that our peoples can unite. The afternoon progressed with intensive training sessions, where Kale discovered latent abilities that had lain dormant within him. He learned to manipulate energy fields, to communicate telepathically, to perceive the underlying patterns of reality. Each new skill brought both exhilaration and exhaustion, leaving him drained yet eager for more. Lyria proved to be a patient teacher, her methods adapting to his unique way of learning. As evening approached, they found themselves in the palace gardens, a hidden sanctuary where crystalline flowers bloomed in impossible colors, their petals singing softly in the twilight. Here, away from the structured lessons and intense memories, they allowed themselves brief moments of normalcy. They spoke of simpler things, their favorite foods, childhood memories, hopes for the future. These conversations helped ground Kale, reminding him that beneath the cosmic drama lay two beings simply trying to understand each other. Yet even in these quiet moments, the weight of their mission remained present. The sky darkened earlier than usual, heavy clouds gathering at the edges of the glacier. Lightning danced in the distance, illuminating the approaching storm. It begins, Lyria murmured, her silver eyes reflecting the distant flashes. The darkness knows we're preparing. It will test us soon. Kale stood beside her, feeling the first drops of rain, strangely warm, against his skin. Then we'd better be ready, he said, his voice steady despite the apprehension tightening his chest. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The storm intensified, its fury shaking the very foundations of the palace. Yet within the eye of the tempest, Kale and Lyria stood united, their bond strengthening with each challenge overcome. They both knew that tomorrow would bring new trials, new revelations, and possibly new threats. But for now, they allowed themselves this moment of peace, drawing strength from each other as the first battle lines were drawn in the cosmic conflict that would determine the fate of their intertwined destinies.